We are live. Yes. So thank you so much for joining us in this live broadcast today. We are going to be having a very interesting panel. My name is Robin Omeka, and
my name is Desmond Ogubi.
Yes,
we're going to be moderating today as we talk about refugees and livelihoods.
Yeah, and we just want as people continue joining in, we already have one viewer 42 seconds into the live stream. So we're just going to have each and every one of our panelists introduce themselves, and I would like to start with Grace.
Thank you very much, Robin. My name is Grace Dirango, and I work for HIAS Refugee Trust of Kenya as the Economic Inclusion Manager.
Okay, succinct. And next we will have Winfred.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Winfred Wangari, and I work with Danish Refugee Council in Livelihoods, where I support in business development training and removal of legal barriers and promotion of markets.
Okay, great. And finally, our last panelist is Joel Wandeto. Joel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joel Wandeto. I work with Danish Refugee Council in the urban program, supporting the livelihoods team in skills development, business, or what we call micro enterprise development, and also market access.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Desmond Ogubi. I'm part of the planning committee for REFU-SERIES, but I work with an organization called Anika as the programs lead. Yes, and this is my partner,
Robin Omeka.
Yeah. So today, as we begin on the live chat, I think I'm going to direct questions to different. We're going to be directing different questions to different individuals, and I think it's wise that I start with. I want to start with Joel. So I've been doing a few research, and I know you have done an interesting paper on some of the factors that affect refugees, especially when it comes to their livelihood with the University of Nairobi. And you have also been working in the same field. What has been your experience so far?
Experience in terms of livelihood?
Yes.
Having worked with the refugees since 2011, I've realized that refugees have diverse skills. They are resilient people. Given equal opportunities, given a level field, refugees are people, and they have the capacity to compete like any other person. The only challenge with refugees is that they have found themselves in circumstances that give them some limits on how much they can do. Where we have restrictions in terms of movement, restrictions in terms of legal restrictions, movement, documentation, and all that. But refugees are people who are resilient, and they have a future given opportunities.
Okay, great. I'd like to follow up with to throw a question to probably all three of you. And you know, when we talk about livelihoods, for somebody who is not a refugee, we can understand what that will mean. For us, it will mean like kuna mama mboga. There is somebody who, you know, does the kawaida jobs that we do today. But for those of us who are struggling with the concept of what livelihoods looks like to a refugee, can you help us understand what livelihood is when we are talking about refugees? What activities constitute livelihoods for refugees? What activities do they have? Yeah, and let's start with Grace, and then we move to Winfred, then finally to Joel.
Okay, thank you, Robin. So when we talk about livelihoods for refugees, we talk about the concept livelihood is a very broad concept that also encompasses the ability to be self-sustaining, that is to meet your daily needs for you and your family as a refugee or as a displaced person. It also means financial literacy, that you're financially literate to be able to manage your finances in a proper way, in such that you also have savings to cater for a rainy day. And livelihood also means that you have a self-sustaining income that is giving you enough resources to manage your daily needs, your basic needs, and in a way that is dignified. Remember, there are so many other ways of livelihood, but not every way of livelihood is dignified. So the kind of livelihood we talk about is dignified sources of income that are not demeaning to the person, that are not exploitative, and in ways in which there is no abuse of the person that is earning this income. Yes.
Okay, great. Winfred, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, I can add something on what Grace has pointed out. And one of the additional things is that uh, it is important that we also include resilience in livelihoods, because as you have seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been supporting, we have been doing a lot of livelihood intervention, but with the pandemic, you have seen that most of the refugees or even the host communities have lost their livelihoods. So then how can we include how can we include resilience in our livelihood intervention? And by resilience, I mean, how can we ensure that we are anticipating risks? How can we empower the community to anticipate the risks, to organize themselves quickly and respond to whatever shock that has come in place, and adapt to the situation in a way that then they don't lose their livelihoods?
And just as a follow-up to what Grace and Winfred have shared, Joel, do you feel like as entities that are mostly concerned with when it comes to working with refugees and their livelihoods, those institutions have been able to do enough to adjust to what is going on during this COVID-19 pandemic?
What you realize is that the support given to refugees, this is a support that comes from donor funding. And therefore, what it means that is we have resources that are very limited. When the need out there, the demand for these resources out there is very high. For example, in the urban setting, you'll find that we have around 84,000 refugees, between 81,000 and 84,000 refugees in the urban. But then the support that is there can only meet like 5% of the refugees that we have, which means 95 refugees have not gotten the support. And if you look at the like popular themes that we have, leave no one behind. It means that 95 refugees have been left behind in accessing livelihood support. That's not exclusion. The challenge is that resources are limited, and therefore, I won't say that we have been able to meet the refugees as it is expected, but we have strived to use the available resources to maximally meet or meet the maximum number of persons that we could attend to. As a livelihood team and partners, among the things that we've looked at is how do we utilize the little resources that we have, and we don't have a situation where we have a double targeting of individuals, so that we are able to have these resources that are spread to the maximum number of persons. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is we have, more than anything, we have an issue with resources, because the few resources that are there have to be spread thin over, as you've said, 5%. Like only 5% can be catered for in a way that's, as Grace had said, meaningful. Maybe I'd ask just before we go on, ahead with the next few questions. Your organizations, the different things that are being done to like address this gap. Yeah. Are there any insights you can give us based on the work that you are doing for refugees and their livelihoods? Let's start with Grace.
Okay, thank you. So I'd say for HIAS, HIAS has been working in Kenya since 2002. And over the years, we have worked with primarily urban refugees in Kenya. Now, in other countries such as Latin America, HIAS is known for the graduation model approach, which is something that HIAS is looking to fundraise and start implementing in Kenya, because the graduation model is a model where the organization will work with a specific number of refugees for a period of almost 24 months, that is 2 years, to ensure that by the time they graduate from that model, they are self-sustaining. And it's not just one individual in a household who is able to meet their needs, but everyone in the household has been able or has benefited from whatever resources were put into that household. So it includes building the skills of other people in that household, building their income generating activities if they do have any, and linking them up to other resources such as employment and apprenticeship, so that they have a wider network, and so that it's not just one person in a household who's supporting everyone else, but a couple of people in a household are able to support one another and pull in their resources for the well-being of that household. Yes.
Okay. Before we head on to Winfred, I'd like to ask you, based on the graduation model, the one that you've stated, can you point out to something that could be preventing it from working here in Kenya, or as opposed to how it's working elsewhere abroad? Like, is there one particular thing you can say is a bottleneck that needs to be sorted out?
Okay, thank you. So one thing I'd say about, and this is not just for HIAS, but for all the refugees in the urban areas, one of the biggest constraints that we face, and maybe Wangari and Joel will talk about this in depth, is the ability of refugees to get into formal employment, mainly because in Nairobi, the government implements what we call the encampment policy, where they require all refugees to live in the designated camp areas. So it means that refugees living in urban areas, that's Nairobi and other urban areas of Kenya, cannot get access to what we call a Class M work permit that is needed for refugees to get into formal employment. So much as we would also want to push for the graduation model, whereas in other countries such as in Ecuador, in Costa Rica, refugees are able to get into the formal employment sector. In Nairobi and in Kenya, refugees cannot get into the formal employment sector. So meaning they depend on the informal sector. And while the informal sector has there are also some areas of income generation. The formal sector, especially for the skilled refugees, could expose them to even other opportunities and other resources. And so that remains the biggest gap. Even as we look to implementing this model, we have to find ways to navigate the issue that refugees are not able to access this Class M work permit. And even though it's free, the process that it takes for one to get that Class M work permit is very lengthy. And based on research that has been done previously by DRC, very few refugees, despite applying, have been able to access this Class M work permit.
Okay. As a follow-up to just what your comment, what you're saying. I know DRC are also mainly interested in the livelihood of refugees, and that, for example, in areas like Nairobi, most of the people who live in most of these host nations feel like refugees are here to just take up some of the opportunities that are actually meant for them. And this is, of course, this is a stereotype. And I feel like that's an area that DRC has been trying to address. So just to speak on that issue, Joel and Winfred, what specific interventions have been put in place by different actors in the refugee sectors that have been able to help or create a channel through which the integration has been better received by the natives of these specific nations?
Maybe I go first.
That's okay,
Uh,
Joel.
yeah, what we world over, we have been having what we say conflicts, or we have been having conflicts world over, and these conflicts in all over the world are caused by scarce resources, and as people scramble for scarce resources, then we have this blame game of that these resources are, we would have benefited if we were fewer. This is the same case when we have now refugees coming into a country where already there exist scarce resources, there exist few opportunities for the host community. And therefore, when the refugees come now, let's say the refugees in the urban area, and they are finding Kenyans in the urban area, and the Kenyans have fewer houses, so housing is a problem, job opportunities are a problem. And when it comes even to access to things like food and also sanitation, or the what we call the public utilities, they are few, then you'll have all these conflicts. What we do is, one, we've realized that refugees live with the host communities, and they are facing similar, the host communities are facing similar challenges with the refugees. If it's access to job opportunities, despite refugees have restrictions, also Kenyans face also unemployment. So what we do is that as we come and intervene in supporting refugees, we also have a percentage of Kenyans who benefit. So we have a 20 to 40% a quarter of 20 to 40% of the service that we give. We also benefit the host community, whereby and our assumption is that the Kenyans who benefit, who are also the lowest or the marginalized in the community, they live in the same environment with the refugees, then they become our advocate out there, and they're able to inform other Kenyans, hey, look here, that these refugees that we live with them, as they benefit, we are also benefiting. So when we share resources with between refugees and also Kenyans, then we help Kenyans become our advocates for the refugees. The other thing is, when we have when we also advocate for refugees not to have like parallel activities, and that is why when we had the international the New York Declaration on what we call the Global Compact on Refugees, we have where the resources are brought together by the government, and the refugees and the host communities benefit together. So we do our advocacy, we talk with the refugees and let them know that let them not have parallel institutions where Kenyans feel like you guys are benefiting from donor aid, you people are living better, and us are living in abject poverty. So advocacy is very important. The second is where we have a targeting, and we give Kenyans as some quota, and they benefit as refugees benefit.
Maybe just
Winfred,
to add on that as we reach out to the host community, it is very important to work with the local administration, because we still under one government as refugees seeking asylum in this country, and therefore once we are able to demystify refugees to the local administration, it becomes very easy for them to understand and support any interventions then that come to their communities, and therefore able to address whatever tensions that come in and not see them as refugee problems, but rather as community problems. So this is very important, that even as we move forward, even as we respond now on COVID, that we are not just responding on refugees, because they are not the only ones who've been affected. So as organizations plan for response and recovery, then it's important to remember that this pandemic has affected everyone, both Kenyans and host. And during our intervention, it's important to reach to all of them equally, moving forward.
Okay. I want us to rally back to a question that only Grace had answered before, the one that you just answered. And so let's go to Joel. Joel, your organization and the work that you're doing for refugees and their livelihoods. Give us a few insights on the same.
So as in Danish Refugee Council, what we do is we try to empower, or we strive to empower our refugees and ensure that they meet their needs in a safe, sustainable, and dignified manner. And our objective is for us to reduce what we call the aid dependency and other negative coping mechanism. So one of the things that we do is we try to have refugees access the labor market, where we support them in skills development. We also do what we call advocacy, and we also like now when we talk of skills development, we train refugees on different skills, where we and these skills, just as you've said, because we also want to reduce the conflict with the Kenyans. What we do is we don't have parallel institutions. We take them to institutions that also Kenyans benefit, whether they are private businesses where they do apprenticeship, or we take them to government institutions where they do the vocational skills and the professional skills. The other things is also we try to also improve the refugees, their enterprise capacity, by training them on entrepreneurship, because we realize that where the world is going right now, there are no jobs out there. And as we say, refugees face the challenges of discrimination. That is open, that because governments want to protect, governments all over the world wants to protect jobs for their citizens. And therefore, the refugees, for them to fit into the formal employment, there are so many restrictions, including the access to work permit. Yes, on paper, on policy, the refugees can access the work permit. But now when it comes to the practical aspect of accessing that work permit, there are restrictions. So what we do to reduce all this dependency on the formal employment, then we improve the entrepreneurship capacity of our beneficiaries by training them on various entrepreneurial skills. We take them through business skills training. We take them on how to do business planning, and that helps to broaden their mind, and they are thinking of those businesses that they can start on their own and not depend on formal employment, which is not feasible. The other thing is we look at also how do we build the capacity of these individuals, where we build their capacity to by putting resources together and then giving them these resources, of building their capacity now to bring those resources together, and also expanding their mind, and they're able to invest. They borrow from those resources and they're able to invest. When they invest, they create, what they do is that they create opportunities for other refugees. So when they like start their business, what they do is open opportunities for both refugees and Kenyans, and that way we are also solving the this issue of Kenyans feeling that refugees are not doing enough, or refugees are just a nuisance to the community. We are scrabbling for resources with them. But when we build capacity for, when we create or build capacity for refugees, and they are able to invest and they are able to open success businesses, then they create employment for Kenyans and refugees. So they open businesses and create those things. And also, my colleague Winfred, I know she will talk about how do we help them also access markets. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joel. Yes, Robin, let me just
Yes, please.
continue. Yes. So DRC also uses what we call the integrated approach, where we work with our protection team. Those of the refugees who have undergone psychosocial support, mental health support, are then transited into livelihoods. And additionally, for those in livelihoods who are in need of any mental health support, are also linked to our protection team for support. So we call that the integrated approach. And we always focus to ensure that we are we are we are that refugees are included economically and financially, how can we reach out to the private sector to support the efforts of inclusion of the global compact? So we find that we are always reaching out to private partners when it comes to ensuring that we have market access for refugees, when it comes to ensuring that refugees are included in the financial system, they're able to access saving accounts. We've gotten to a point where some refugees have actually been able to access microloans from microfinance institutions. So those are some of the gains that we are making under economic and financial inclusion. Additionally, we are also focused on strengthening the community structures because we acknowledge the fact that resources will never be enough. Nowhere in the world can resources be enough. And therefore, how can the community support themselves? And this can be through what we call community savings and loans groups, where the community themselves are able to come together, save the little resources that they have, and boost each other in terms of their livelihoods and also social support. So these community savings and loan groups have also evolved to a point where they are forming apexes and CBOs and starting group businesses. So these approaches are enabling us to match what donors are giving and what the community then can build on their own. Back to you, Robin.
Great. So now we've had an all-rounded, insightful talk on the different things that these organizations are doing. I'm seeing the comment section is live. Mercy Kaleche says, I like the point of refugees being empowered with skills. This is what any other person needs for easy access to the job market. And I think we have a few questions based on that a bit later on. Millicent Olo says, I think sustainability for refugees requires we also find ways for the host community to understand and appreciate who refugees are and see potential for coming together to address challenges. I want to go back to a comment that was made by, I think it was Grace, when it was said that even when the refugees have access to education, still they have what's the word? Like they can't do professional work. I think like access to professional employment is very scanty or very limited. Like there's a huge bottleneck towards that end. And so I'd ask, other than business, are there specific interventions? For example, I will imagine that it can be sorted out by a policy embarkment of sorts. Is there anything related to policy that you are aware of that we should know about, and possibly can we plug in?
How can we come in?
Yeah, how can we come in as people who identify with the struggle of refugees, but also need to help? How do we plug into that particular conversation? Let's see, going once, going twice. Let's start with
Grace.
So thank you, Robin. I think to address your question on policy, and I stand corrected by Joel and Winfred, I am not aware of policies about ensuring that refugees get into the formal employment process. But what as organizations have done, spearheaded by UNHCR, is continue with advocacy, not just with the government of Kenya, but also with the private sector, the Federation for Kenyan Employers, to ensure that they can also absorb refugees where possible. But then the question always remains, what happens? Yes, you find a refugee who has the right skills, the right experience, but they don't have the work permit. And so this is where advocacy comes in. And it's not just advocacy at the national level, but it's advocacy coming from other regional and international levels. For example, through the Kampala Declaration, where the East Africa region is also working together to see that they have a formal declaration where they can continue to advocate for integration of refugees. And so, and this integration can only happen if refugees are also able to get into the formal employment sector. And so my answer would be we don't have a policy in place, not that I'm not aware of any, but there's continued advocacy processes to ensure that there is a way to address these bottlenecks of refugees getting into the formal employment sector.
So Robin, what I'm aware of is there are a number of maybe international treaties. In Kenya, we have some acts of parliament, like we have the Refugee Act, which was enacted in 2006, and there is a revision which was done in 2012. And at the moment, there is a proposal of the revision of the Refugee Act, which, as at last year, it had not gone through Parliament. It was going through what we call public participation. And this Refugee Act, what it seeks is to, among other things, give refugees a number of or what we call few rights to refugees, like the rights to property, rights to work, rights to documentation. What you realize is that in seeking formal employment, the challenges we've been having, one of them is the documentation. That when you go to the employers, what they seek is for you to have a work permit, then they seek for you to have an ID, what we call the refugee certificate. But then for you to access the work permit, then you need other documentation like the KRA PIN. And for you to get the KRA PIN, then you go back to having the right documentation. So what the Refugee Act tried to seek is for these refugees to have the right documentation. And we also have other international treaties or covenants, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1996, which seeks to see on how refugees can have the political and the civil rights. We also have other rights like the ICER, what we call the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. We also have the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Because what you realize is that refugees, they are facing discrimination like you would have a discrimination on access to rights. So what we are looking at are this as government as governments where refugees, or as host communities, or host countries of refugees. Can we have us implementing these international treaties that are seeking to have equal rights to Kenyans and also refugees, and we stop discriminating them? If people are given the proper documentation, then it will be easier for them to access formal employment.
Maybe just to add a final comment is that
just one more, please. We also have the 2012 the Kenya Citizenship and Immigration Regulations, which seeks to have the issuance of documentation, and this issuance of documentation includes the Class M work permit to refugees and other immigrants. But now, having all these acts of parliament, having all these treaties, we still have challenges with the refugees and other immigrants accessing formal employment, because on paper this is possible, but when you go now on the procedure of getting this, then it is there are so many bureaucracies.
Winfred.
Yes, Winfred.
yes, just to add on is that this issue does not affect Kenya only; it also affects other countries who are hosting refugees, and therefore we find that under the Global Compact, we had the document that we call the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, where inclusion is key. And therefore, we must acknowledge for inclusion to be done, the government are the key players in this search for inclusion. And we have, just like Grace mentioned, we have a lot of advocacy being done, led by UNHCR, including other partners who are focused on advocacy on this inclusion, focused on ensuring that the government understands that refugees are not a burden. And we have so many agencies who are trying to gather data or provide data that shows that refugees can contribute positively to the community and not just be a burden.
Just on the point that Wilfred has mentioned on the inclusion, there are a few stereotypes that go around. They say refugees are lazy. They also say they are rich, especially the ones from Sudan, and they say they get a lot of money from the UN, so they never do anything. Those are some of the stereotypes. And because of these simple assumptions, we have not been able to fully integrate refugees economically, because some of the locals also believe because of all this, there are going to be affirmative actions that are going to help them get into positions that they don't really merit. What can we do to economically include and sometimes just do away with these stereotypes that hinder the integration of the refugees?
I think just like you called them stereotypes, they are what they are. They're just stereotypes. And
Yes.
they are stereotypes simply because refugees have not been demystified to the host community. Just like we are different even in Kenya with different 42 ethnic tribes. It's the same way we will find someone else from a different country, is of a different culture. And if we don't understand their culture and how they do things, then we will stereotype them. So it is important to have a bottom-up approach when it comes to intervention. How do we go to the ground? How can we use the community structures to demystify refugees and to work with refugees and host community together when it comes to our intervention efforts? Such that we are ensuring that Kenyans and refugees are collaborating when it comes to livelihoods. How can they work together in their businesses? What can they both learn from each other? When it comes to mental health support, how can they support each other at community level? So if we include them from the using a bottom-up approach, I believe we can be able to demystify refugees to Kenyans and the Kenyans to refugees.
To add on to what Wangari has said, about demystifying the stereotypes about refugees, it would also be important to share the narratives of refugees. You see, a lot of times in the host community, and not just in Kenya, but everywhere else, there's that gap in knowledge about what the stories behind these refugees who are fleeing. What are they fleeing from? What was their experience? What was their life back in their country of origin? Because a lot of the refugees who are now being hosted in Kenya and other countries, they had lives elsewhere. They had skills. They were running businesses. They were employees somewhere. Some national, some government employees, some very high-profile employees. When you look at, for example, the Syria crisis, they say the Syrian refugees are some of the most high-skilled refugees that the world has seen to date. And when you look at the context for Africa, you look at refugees coming from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from Congo. A lot of them are skilled. A lot of them were running businesses. They were entrepreneurs. They owned homes. But what has caused that? They had to flee that life and come to a country where they cannot, where they are now called refugees. So we need to share that narrative of the refugees, because that's the only way. The shared experience, the shared stories is one of the ways that can demystify these stereotypes and get the host community to see refugees as people who have a story behind what they are today, and that the refugees are not comfortable being in the country of asylum, being dependent on handouts. Some of them are willing to work. Some of them come and hit the ground running, looking for for ways in which, so once we share that narrative, once we share those stories, it is the only way that we can now begin to change the narrative of these stereotypes.
Joel has disappeared and he. Okay.
Yeah.
Joel is back.
Yeah.
Yes, Joel is back. Joel, I'm sure you wanted to add something.
Please add something too.
On the stereotypes, like my colleague Winfriend said, they are stereotypes, and these exist in a society where we have communities, different communities. We also have stereotypes when it comes to Kenyan communities, and what I'm thinking is we said when we starting, the local administration is, or the local leadership is very important in demystifying this stereotypes. We have the local administration. We do advocacy and let the local administration first understand who these refugees are, because we found ourselves in situations. Okay, as personally, I found myself in a situation where you meet someone, and someone in leadership who doesn't understand there are refugees in their area, and the person asks what are these refugees doing, and their country is peaceful. So it's good for them. First of all, we bring our leadership, we bring the local leadership into play, let them understand who refugees are, and then when we have this, what we call the public barazas, where we have the host community and the host community with their leadership, we bring refugees and let them participate in these barazas, so that one, they are able to air their challenges. But besides airing their challenges, the local administration now can make the host community understand that, hey, we have these people existing amongst us. These are people who are peaceful. These are victims of circumstances, and they are not here to compete for resources. They are here because situations in their country cannot allow them to be in those countries. They cannot get protection from their country, and therefore we have to offer this protection. And I think that's the best way we can do, so that we are able to demystify this stereotype.
Great. Okay, so that's very insightful. As we're on the tail end of the live broadcast, but I want to ask a very contextualized question to the current times we're living in today. Sahi kila mtu analia corona, hakuna pesa, like I feel like corona has been used as an excuse for everything under the sun in this particular period. But that notwithstanding, could you be aware through your work that you have been doing and are still doing right now? Could you be aware of any economic impacts that this COVID pandemic has had on whatever livelihoods that exist for the refugees? Like, I feel like probably it was touched on a bit earlier, but I'd like to state it so that on the record we can be talking about it and people understand more on what the impact of the coronavirus has been, especially for the refugees communities, because we're already feeling the pinch, so I can only imagine how much harder it is for them. Yes, do I do my raffle?
I can go first. So to answer your question, Robin, like I said earlier, a lot of the refugees, because of the bottlenecks in getting into formal employment, are dependent on informal employment. And this informal employment can range from juakali to doing laundry for what we call the mamafuas, and selling groceries on the streets, hawking and all that kind of things. So you can imagine right now, there was that feature that ran on Citizen a couple of weeks ago of how the Kenyan mamafuas are struggling to get jobs because the people who used to give them those jobs can no longer allow them into homes. It's the same thing with the refugees. For those who used to hawk, they can no longer go on the streets because there are not as many people as there were before. For those who are running small businesses, they're experiencing the same pinch that the Kenyan host or the Kenyan citizen is experiencing. The same person, a Kenyan who is in the same business as a refugee, for example, maybe doing a small kiosk, the mama mbogas and all that, the refugee is experiencing the same issues. There's a high cost of products. There is not enough customers, so they're not able to make enough money to cater for their overheads, like restocking the kiosk, paying for the small council fees that they have to pay, or even paying for rent for those who are in rental promises and all that. And so the impact is heavier on refugees. I'd not say because the impact is heavy on everyone, but for refugees who have no one or do not have a place that they can run to, you can imagine for them it's even harder because they are now having to depend on their fellow refugees who are also maybe hit or in the same circumstances they are. Yes.
So in addition to a lot of refugees losing their income, with the extended measures and the fact that we don't see people are trying to go back to business, we've seen that refugees have actually gotten to an extent where they are using their savings and selling their assets so that they're able to manage their household needs. And this is it's a negative coping mechanism because now when you come to the recovery period, then that means you have no assets, you have no things that help you to start your business. And the fact that we have refugees have very little social networks or limited social networks compared to the host communities, it becomes an even bigger task for agencies to look for resources then to address the gains that have been lost in terms of livelihoods.
And
So in addition to that, I'm also looking at there has been an increase to what we call unexpected expenses on the side of refugees. The same case we have Kenyans, which is distorting family incomes. We have refugees that you have to buy a face mask, which is unexpected income, and you also have to buy a sanitizer if you don't find soap elsewhere. You have to have soap every time. The house must be having soap. You must be having water every day or every time so that you're able to fight this COVID. You also realize that there has been an upward increase, or there has been an increase in transport charges. And this affects, as much as it affects Kenyans, it is also affecting refugees, and this has a negative implication on the family budget. We also have something, you realize there are also lots of future opportunities for refugees who are especially students, those who are in trainings and all that. We've lost from March, we've lost March, April, and we've lost May. Those are 3 months, and now we are in June. So if we are to lose like 4 months for refugees who we were doing skills training, and this was let's say we had a course going for 6 months or a course going for 3 months, let's say a short course. Like I had beneficiaries who were doing some training in beauty, and they were supposed to have a 2 month course. They started in March. We are now in June, and they have not completed their course. It means that the expected the income streams that we expected to be there somewhere in May, they are not there, and so there is that loss of future opportunities for students. And also we are having a situation where the refugee are also scrambling for limited resources. Same case with Kenyans. Yeah, because if we have these people crossing businesses, then it means we have Kenyans crossing businesses, we have refugees crossing businesses, and therefore the few resources that are there that are cheaper, because most of the resources that are there are a bit expensive. Then the fewer resources that are cheaper, then we have refugees and Kenyans scrambling for them, and that this might also bring social challenges.
Okay. Thank you, I'm going to do a follow-up on that, but first I'll go to the comment section. We have Neema Kalama saying that she's following. Martin Mwangi, he says that one of the ways to help out refugees is to reduce the legal procedures for them to acquire a work permit in Kenya. I was talking to one of them, and he was saying they are not disabled; they're just refugees. Yeah, and then we have a very intriguing question from Maguto Jacob, and he says that many government organizations. He says many government organizations implement programs because of donor interests. To what extent is do refugees really need? To what extent is refugees' real needs sought when designing interventions? So I think that's a question that we could touch on. Yeah. So to what extent are refugee needs really sought when designing interventions?
Like public participation.
Yeah, like public participation.
Okay, to answer that question, when agencies are designing interventions, one of the things that you have to do is to consult the intended population that will benefit from that intervention. Without having done that, then the intervention is likely to be rejected, as we have seen in projects, not just touching on, even with Kenyan project, for example, you hear about the stories about the CDF. The community was not consulted, and so they reject that project. Even with refugees, we have seen instances where when an intervention has been done without their consent, without their consultation, without their participation, then they reject that intervention. They are not willing to engage in that intervention. And so as agencies and also at HIAS, one of the things we do is we have focus group discussions before designing any interventions. We have sit-downs with the key refugee community leaders, specific with the women, with the children, with the youth, because all their needs are different and they have to be met by the interventions that we are designing. And so to what extent will we be meeting the interventions? And that is something that we can only understand by having conversations with them. We cannot begin to design interventions without having thought of or without having had conversations with them, because then we are likely to say that, oh, the women maybe need kitenge, and then you go and find that they actually have much more kitenge than you could provide, and they didn't need what you're bringing in the first place. And so having those different conversations and having them with the various groups is very vital, because again, the needs of women, men, children, and the youth are very different. The needs of the disabled persons, the need of the elderly, they have to be factored into the interventions that are designed.
Yes, Winfred, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I think what Grace has said is what most agencies do. But what Jacob is also saying is true, that sometimes we do all this process, but the donor has their own interest. And I think for me, it's important that as agencies that we emphasize using data, that if whatever interest the donor has will not work, and we have data to show this, then it's important to just stand firm and inform and consult with donors, just to show them that this then will lead to a waste of resources if at all we are going to follow their interests, yet this interest then is not going to uplift or empower this community. So if you're able to show the value in terms of the resources they put and the impact that you're then going to have to the community using data, then I think it becomes easier to change the donor interest in that perspective.
Okay. Jar, you have anything to add?
What we realize is that a number of times, as Jacob has said, a number of times what we have are supply-driven aid as opposed to a demand-driven aid, where we have aid given by donors, but then there are strings attached to this aid, that this aid we are giving is for this specific purpose. And therefore, as organizations, at that point, you are timed and you have to implement projects that these donors have identified. But then, as Grace has said, it is important. That's what and what is required is where we have a comprehensive needs assessment being done. And if a comprehensive needs assessment is not done, then we would have some mini assessments while you are in the field, where communities come and express needs. For our case, for our organization, what we do is, for refugees who come even to our organizations, we usually reckon the kind of support they require over a period of time. And then every month we analyze what kind of support do these these refugees been sorting in our organization, and that one of that helps us to identify that this kind of support is required by refugees. And then when we go to the field, when we have what we call close out meetings in the field with the refugees, as we cross previous projects, or as we cross the running projects for that year, then the refugees also express to us what kind of need, or what kind of intervention they would want moving forward. And that way, we are also able to go and talk to the donor and inform the donor that in the field, or from the community, this is a kind of support that they would require. And then, as my colleagues have saying, that donors also have their own interests. For example, as we implement a project for under the UN, behalf of UNHCR, then you realize that UNHCR has a livelihood strategy.
I think, Joel, we're losing
I know
you.
the point which we are implementing, and therefore, as much as an organization, we lost you. Okay,
No, we're good.
What you are saying, I stand corrected, is that as we implement livelihood on behalf of UNHCR, you know that UNHCR has what we call a livelihood strategy. And at the moment, I think we have a 2019 to 2023 livelihood strategy, and that identifies areas that UNHCR has identified and that requires us to intervene. And therefore, yeah, it's important to do a needs assessment, but also we have donor funding that, or a donor aid, that is what we call a donor tied aid. Kind of, it has strings attached.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So we only have 3 minutes left, and in these 3 minutes, I want to have one last question, and then I think we will do wrap up. So I feel like we have touched on a broad spectrum of issues, livelihoods, but if I am somebody who is in the host community, or I am just a Kenyan who stays, say, for example, in Nairobi. Basically, anybody who feels that they need to plug in to the economic empowerment or economic livelihood upbringing of refugees, so that it's improved. What can I do? Are there drives for donations? Are there business opportunities? Are there volunteer opportunities to go and teach things? Or, for example, uh, I don't know, entrepreneurship. If I know how to do beadwork, who do I talk to teach? How do I, as a citizen, approach the refugee space if I need to help in the smallest way I have possible to help?
Okay. So to answer to your question, Robin, about the drives, there is a drive by UNHCR called Luku Luku. So that's one of the drives in which anyone who's interested can donate to. In terms of skills empowerment, there's so many organizations that are doing livelihood skills empowerment for refugees, starting with HIAS, DRC, even UNHCR is approachable by anyone who is willing to plug in into this work. either by donating their skills or donating their experience, or even maybe trying to support through mentorship. You can approach any of the agencies, and if the agencies are not available, then you can approach through UNHCR, because UNHCR is the overall and works through all these other partner agencies. Yes.
Yeah. Additionally, these refugees live amongst us Kenyans. They live in Moja, Kasarani, just the usual residences where we live in. So if you know of a refugee and is your neighbor, it's just good to just approach and ask what support they need. You can start at that level. Secondly, you can also approach what we call the community-based organizations, CBOs. We have those that are refugee-led, we have those that are Kenyans, and we have those that collaborate. And these CBOs have various interventions or approaches that also try to address the needs of the refugees and also communities. So those can be some of the other platforms besides what this has mentioned that you can tap into.
Okay.
Yes, Joel.
Joel, not Joey.
Joel.
I think
Oh, Joel is losing you.
I think sorry. At the micro level is what my colleague Winfried has said. At the micro level, then these people that we are living with them, let us help them out there in the community. But then if you want to go to the macro level, then we have the UNHCR with the Rukuruku project, where we can now make donations, and when we come together, then we bring these resources together, and then we are able to support more number of refugees. So if somebody doesn't understand, doesn't know the refugees who exist and would want to go the macro level, then can go through the Rukuruku. Or if they know CBOs that deal with the refugees, they know organizations like Danish Refugee Council or HIAS or other refugee organizations that do livelihoods and they want to support refugees, then they can approach them. For DRC, we have what we call an open door policy, where you can just pop in and you are welcome. Whether you want to pop in at the field office or where you want to go to the regional office, then the door is open.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you so much for. I think. Hold on. Should we get the last comments?
Yeah, like closing remarks.
Closing remarks. If you have any.
For me, my closing remarks would be, we've spoken a lot about what refugees are experiencing during this COVID pandemic. But they're not just seated as victims. They are doing a lot to plug into dealing with this pandemic. A lot of them engaged in making masks, making soap and distributing it in their local communities, even among the host communities, and also teaching other maybe refugees who are not very literate on how they can observe hygiene conditions. Yes.
Winfried.
So, yes, for me, my last comment is just to urge partners to continue to collaborate during the response period and not forget to plan for recovery, to include more resilient approaches towards our intervention, and include host communities so that we reduce the tensions amongst between refugees and the host community. Thank you.
Joel.
For me, what I would say is that one, refugees are people like you and I, and the only challenge is that they have found themselves in circumstances that anyone else can find themselves in such circumstances. There are people who, given opportunities, they are able to compete and even outdo some of our the host communities. But then these people face, because we live with them, then we face similar challenges in the community, only that their issues are compounded by the issues of documentations and the protection issues. And therefore, I would ask for people who out there would want to support refugees, and especially during this COVID time, then they can come out and see how best we can support refugees. whether during this COVID and post-COVID, where we have recovery and ensure that these refugees they are able to earn decent livelihood, they are able to live like other Kenyans, and then and they become self-sustaining.
Great, awesome. So
Back to you.
that has been a very interesting conversation. Eh?
Yes.
My name has been Robin Omeka. We will unfortunately have to love everybody and leave everybody until tomorrow. Yeah, so I'm handing over to the host.
Yes. I've been Desmond. I'm Desmond actually, and thank you all guys for coming here and just having this informative session. And we look forward to spreading the word out here more. And tomorrow, by the way, we'll be talking about gender-based violence and mental health. And I hope you join us. And until then, we'll see you guys. Thank you so much for coming and being with us in this session.
Thank you, Desmond.
Thank you, Desmond and Robin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Desmond, Robin. Bye. Thank you. Bye, Wangari.
Bye.
No,
I'm trying to
it's not.
hang up.
This is not our platform.